I have a teenage daughter, so I learn from her every day. And there's a phrase at the moment going around, raw dogging. So raw dogging.
Yeah.
So raw dogging, when the teens are going no gadgets, no earphones, no phones, no computers, no laptops, and literally sitting on the floor in their room for 15 minutes. Isn't that extraordinary? So the trend is coming to almost disconnect. So it's almost saying I'm reclaiming that I'm not going to go falling into this trap.
Welcome to the Elephants in the Boardroom podcast. My name is Graeme Codrington, and this month Dean is out, so it's just me. And we'll be looking, as we normally do in this podcast, at the forces that are shaping the world around us, how they are changing the world, and what we should do about them. Welcome to this month's edition. Dean has some exciting news. Let me tell you this in his absence. He's just about to launch some work that he's doing some research on and is really excited about. He's calling it Ignite. And you'll hear more from him in the next episode. But for now, I highly recommend that you pop along to Dean's LinkedIn profile. He's starting to drip feed some of the stories, the research he's been doing, the insights into really, where do good ideas come from? Where does innovation flow from? And what can we do to get a piece of the action, if you like? So if you're not already following Dean on LinkedIn, he's in a bit of a zone at the moment of creativity, and his LinkedIn page is really worth following right now. So go ahead and do that. We're in February 2026, and my word, what a year it has already been. 1 month down, but it feels like we've already finished 12 of them. It's been crazy. Luckily, this podcast isn't a news podcast, so you're not coming here to keep up to date. Thank goodness, because I don't know how the news broadcasters are doing it at the moment. I think the news is changing while they are telling it to us these days. And I suppose that's really what we've been saying for the last few years here at Tomorrow Today, that this cycle of change, we're in a historical and an era-defining cycle of change, where that cycle of change is going to just get so fast, it's actually impossible to keep up. So you don't want to just, like a hamster where the wheel just gets too fast and the hamster just gets ejected from the wheel and collapses in a heap on the side. You don't want that to happen. But on the other hand, you can't just keep on this speedy wheel of change. And I suppose we've reached that moment where you have to accept that you've got to change the way that you engage with the world around you. And you've got to accept the way you engage with news, with your news sources, with trying to keep up. You can't keep up, therefore you have to change. So welcome to the podcast. If you've just worked out that that's where you have to be, this is what we try and do at Tomorrow Today. We try and give you a different way to see the world, a different way to engage with the change that's going on, giving you frameworks that help you make sense of it. And then, and this was one of the words that Dean gifted to us a year or so ago, we need to be ready to take advantage of this Kairos moment of change. At Tomorrow Today, the model that we use and the label that we gave this podcast is the elephant in the room, or the elephant in the boardroom. And we believe you don't need to be looking for the unexpected, the incomprehensible changes that might come our way. What you need to be looking at is the things that we know are already here, the forces that we know are shaping the world, geopolitical forces that we've seen coming for a long time. Nobody should be surprised by what Donald Trump is doing. You can look at Project 2025 and you can see the roadmap. It was laid out a few years ago and he seems to be following it. Whether you like it or not is a different conversation, but it shouldn't be surprising as to some of the things he's laid out. It shouldn't be surprising. The way in which countries like Canada, for example, are responding. If you know any Canadians, you'll know they're the nicest people, the friendliest people, until you see them on the ice hockey, playing ice hockey. And if you push them the wrong way, you know what they do in response. They're not scared of a fight, is what I'm trying to say. And at Davos a few weeks ago, when their Prime Minister Mark Carney stood up, gave a magnificent speech. I'm sure you've seen it, if not the whole of it, snippets of it. But I think he got it exactly right with that one phrase. We are in the midst of a rupture, not a transition. And that's exactly right. So actually, at one level, there shouldn't be any geopolitical surprises. Demographics is another place we often look at to see how the world is changing. It's slow moving, but then suddenly people wake up and are surprised. Hey, family sizes are smaller. People are not getting married anymore. People are not having children anymore. The world's demographics are changing. Shouldn't be surprising, but still is. Climate change is another example we love to use. I don't know about you if you travel as much as our team does. This year already, the people in our team who've been traveling, in fact, I probably should have counted up, but I know of at least 5 flight disruptions and travel disruptions in January. And that is mainly due to climate change, extreme weather, and airlines not adjusting their schedules on the basis of the fact that they are likely to have delays, likely to be delayed, therefore likely to be disrupted, but still they haven't changed their schedules in 10 years. And so the list can go on. You're probably listening to the podcast because you see the same things that we do and you want to know how to respond. So what Dean and I wanted to chat about this month, and we had a great conversation lined up. I'm just going to go in, and I hope you don't mind me just going ahead with the one half of the conversation and bringing in some of Dean's perspective as we go along. What we thought we'd do is we'd pick one big example of what does it mean to see disruption coming, but then, and here's the word Dean gifted to us, grab hold of the opportunity that a Kairos moment of change brings. The Greeks had different words for time. One is chronos, which is just the chronological advance on time. And as crazy as it seems, time still moves 1 second, 1 minute, 1 hour, one sunrise and sunset at a time. That hasn't changed. But then they had a number of other labels for time. One of them, the most dramatic, is this moment of Kairos. It was actually pictured as a giant bird coming down out of the sky. And if you were ready for the moment that this Kairos event or this Kairos moment hit us, you were able to grab hold of that and take advantage of whatever opportunities it could bring. If you weren't ready for it, it would be like an attack from the sky, this bird coming in and taking you out. And you'd be defending yourself, and in a moment it was over and gone. And you would have missed that moment of opportunity and it would be gone. And so for us, half of the job is making sure you keep your eyes open and are not surprised by the big disruptions coming your way. And we spend quite a lot of time helping our clients switch their radars on. But the other part of it is to be ready for the moment, to be in a Kairos mindset rather than just in a chronos or a defensive mindset. And this Kairos mindset, we've looked around for examples, and there are good corporate examples of companies that had ideas that were ready when a change came, and then, we hate the word, but it's probably the right word, they pivoted when the moment came. And of course, COVID gave us a few examples of that, but there are regular examples of this happening in the corporate world. But we thought we'd look for maybe the biggest example we could look for at the moment, in the middle of this crazy time that we are in, especially geopolitically. And we think China is a wonderful example. Before I talk about China, let me just say one or two things about the choice of the example. Most of our clients, I think, are either Western or Middle Eastern at the moment. That's just the nature of the work and the history of the work that we've done. And to be honest, I suspect that there is, I'm going to call it for what it is, I think there is a little bit of racism, I think that's the right label, in terms of people looking across at China and saying, China is a problem, or China is a great enemy, or China is a great threat. Yes, China is not a democracy. And China has its own particular way of doing things, and there's obviously a downside to being an autocracy, but there are also some significant upsides as well. We'll talk about one or two of those as we go along. But then I say to my friends who live in democratic countries and who are so convinced that democracy is the ultimate expression of human community, I say, if you think democracy is so brilliant, do you use democracy in your workplace? How many of you voted for your manager last year? How many of you vote for your CEO? If democracy and capitalism go hand in hand, well, please explain to me why we don't use democracy in the workplace. I know it's a bit of a cheeky question to ask, but I think it's a good one. And I think it proves democracy is not necessarily the only option available, and not even the best one, necessarily. And then I talk about capitalism, of course, and I say, well, China is possibly a more capitalistic system than actually even the United States or Europe. And China, of course, call it capitalism with Chinese elements around it. Yes, they allow companies to sort of go on and operate within a relatively free market, but then there is government control. So every now and again, the government just steps in and says, we just remind you that you are supposed to be operating in an environment where you do good for all of society. And Jack Ma, who heads up one of the biggest companies in China, the competition for Amazon, he was reminded a few years ago, just rein it back in, make sure that you are not ripping off any customers, and give back to society, and all will be well. And he did it. Credit to him. He knows how to work within the Chinese version of it's not really communism, although that's the name of the party. It's not really socialism, although that's what it's doing, and has brought more people out of poverty than any other country in history, I think. And it's not really full capitalism, but it's this nice mix of whatever works for whatever you are looking at. But before we get into it, I just want to talk about how we at Tomorrow Today choose which companies and which countries we work in, because we do get some criticism every now and again when people look at the map of which countries we work in and where we travel to. I'm not being defensive. It's part of the story I want to tell in this podcast. We give each person in our team the ability to make their own choices, using their own conscience and their own moral framework as a guideline. We have one associate who grew up in the home of an alcoholic and just refuses to do any work with any companies that deal with alcohol. That's fine. That's their choice. We fully understand and support her entirely. Other people in our team will not do work, for example, in the tobacco industry. We have one or two people who are very strongly committed to pacifism and won't do any work with any weapons manufacturers, and that includes some of the big airline companies that provide military hardware. They just won't work there, whereas some of the other members of our team are comfortable with that. When you're dealing with individual companies, it's maybe easier to make those moral or conscience decisions about who you work with. But when it comes to criticism of working in a certain country, we had a long conversation as a team about this, and you might find it interesting. We thought, you know what, with the exception of maybe one or two countries here or there, I mean, who's ever said anything bad about New Zealand? The home of the hobbits. Oh, sorry, my Kiwi friends, it's a lot more than that. It's hard to dislike the All Blacks, even when you're a Springbok rugby supporter. Who's ever said anything horrible about Estonia, for example? So there might be a country here or there that, you know, they're blameless, if you like. You can't think of any reason why you'd want to boycott the country or even a need to. But besides one or two countries here or there, if you really look for it, there's a reason to not work with any country anywhere. This is a generalization of note, but like politicians are corrupt. in every country. So if we're looking for corruption, if we're looking for warmongering, I believe there's only one country in the world that has never invaded another country or been involved in a war. I believe that country is Botswana. I'm open to correction on that, but otherwise every other country's been involved in a war somehow and invaded another country. So, if that's your moral criteria, then how would you judge? And if you're looking for colonial influence, or you're looking for a history that includes things that shouldn't have been done, like you can go as far back as slavery. I mean, how far back would we go? Would we blame modern Italians for what the ancient Romans did? And so you could get yourself, if you're looking at a country perspective, into a situation where you could say, I'm not working in any country or for any government under any circumstances. And I think you could probably think that way, and you might be right. At our company, at Tomorrow Today, we made a different decision. And we said there might be some countries that we would boycott specifically for specific reasons. There may be specific things that those countries are doing specifically now that we want to stand against or stand up for, and we would make that known. And we have made certain decisions. I don't want to speak on behalf of the rest of the team. I've made some of my decisions, and you can look on my social media, and those decisions and statements are fairly clear. But we decided that the work that we do is about helping people, and that includes governments and politicians, and it includes business people and people who work in the nonprofit sector in every country in the world. We would like to help them to not just think about the future, but to imagine possible futures. And not just imagine those futures, but actually create the best versions of those futures that they possibly can. So, for example, a number of years ago, I did a little bit of work in Russia, and then I was invited to contribute actually to a think tank that was looking at future issues in Russia. They asked us to submit proposals, and I submitted a proposal which was about injustice. And the topic was called Just Us for All. 4 words, just us, in other words, just us people for all. But of course, the play on words in English was about justice for everyone. And I specifically focused on the issue of LGBTQI inclusion, which is something I am particularly passionate about. Now, this didn't go down well. I was told that I would not be able to come and present my paper in Russia, and I haven't since then, and there are other reasons to also not go back to Russia at the moment. And I haven't been back since then. We'll see, maybe in the future. So we're not scared to speak truth to power. That might be an overstatement. I don't think any of my notes ever made it to the Kremlin. I'm not that important. But we are not scared to take our voice into environments, into various countries, and to speak our minds and to help those countries. We hope we do it respectfully and culturally sensitively, but we are not scared to say we have a particular view of the type of future that we believe might be a good future for us all, and to be part of looking beyond where we find ourselves at the moment and building that future together. So now, if you're thinking how all of this leads into a conversation about China, let me get to the heart of this monologue today. I hope you're enjoying it. China has a fascinating way of making plans. For the last 75 years, since the founding of the People's Republic of China, they have worked on a 5-year rolling plan system. Technically, what is supposed to happen is that there is a 5-year plan in place. A new leader of the country comes to power about 2 years into a 5-year plan. So he is gifted, they've all been men up to now, he is gifted the 5-year plan that is sort of halfway done. And he's not allowed to change it. It's in place, and he is the custodian of delivering it. Towards the end of that 5-year plan, so he's now 3 years into his premiership, he can then set a new 5-year plan and lead his party to setting the new 5-year plan. He's then got the whole 5 years in power because they have essentially 2 5-year plans. They normally have a 10-year leadership tenure. Then he sets the next 5-year plan and he runs it for a year or two and then hands over to the next person. I think you can see the benefits of doing this. There's some continuity. You get to deliver a big 5-year plan, and then you set a new one up, set aside, let fresh eyes come in, and so the cycle repeats. And so it has essentially repeated for 14 cycles to get us to the 75 years since the beginning of the People's Republic. The crazy news is that those 5-year plans, we just finished at the end of last year, we finished the 14th 5-year plan, and a new one is being launched now. Close on 90% of the targets that have been set in each of those 5 years plans have been met. Now, part of that is that you set realistic goals. You don't have a democracy, so you don't have to overpromise and underdeliver. You can set what you know you can deliver. But also part of it is that the Chinese government has said that once you've got the plan in place, and they meet once a year at the Chinese two sessions meetings, those all then get cascaded all the way down to municipal level to the mayors of the local towns and cities. You are responsible for delivering on that plan and for then showing your results all the way up. And they're quite brutal with their politicians if they don't meet their targets. But it's quite a thing to think that your government sets out plans and about 90% of what it sets out to do, it achieves. It's quite remarkable, right, when you think about it. But here is the interesting thing. Right now, President Xi has asked if he could have a third term. They've had to have a change in constitution. It's unprecedented. Well, not quite unprecedented. Some of you may know about Chairman Mao, but we don't need to go into that history. But he is now asking for another term, a third term, to bring another plan. But in order to show that he's the right person for that, they have released not just a 5-year plan, but last year the Chinese government released their 2035 plan. They also released their 2049 plan, which will be the 100th anniversary of the People's Republic. So we now have both the short term, the medium, and we can call it the long term, 25-year plan up to 2049. And you can get it. It's available in multiple languages on the Chinese government website. You can look, they've got beautiful one-pagers. Behind the one page of each, the 2035 plan has got 12 key pillars to it. You can look behind each pillar and you can see the exact metrics that they are planning to use. And we should not be surprised about what happens next in China. Nobody in China is surprised. And there are a few key things that are about to change. China is, for example, changing dramatically its relationship with IP, with intellectual property. Apologies to any Chinese people, this is going to be a gross oversimplification. But the view has been that China doesn't really take IP seriously. And they are, copyright is not a big issue. Although, if I can give one of my friends, Frederick Horan, a little bit of a shout out, he's a professional speaker. He was the one who first pointed that out. He said, that's not true. In China, they've always had been very, very serious about copyright. But just in China, it's 2 words. It's copyright. And there's more seriousness behind that little piece of humor there than you think. Because that's been China's goal. Travel around the world, find the best things, make your version of it, and make it the best version. And they've been brilliantly successful at that. But they are now moving in to both the global copyright system as well as the ISO system. And by 2035, they want to be leading players in protecting copyright and complying with ISO. That's significant. And anybody who works with or works for Chinese companies needs to see that. Another big shift is that they are opening up the Chinese market. Chinese companies are actively being incentivized to globalize. This is different from what we've seen before. And Chinese companies are being incentivized to welcome foreign partners in. And we need to see exactly what that looks like. But this is a big shift. China is moving into an internationalization and globalization phase that they haven't had for 75 years. Again, you shouldn't be surprised. And it isn't a colonial imperialist mindset. It's actually almost pure capitalism, which should scare everybody because not even America's got pure capitalism. America is using tariffs at the moment to protect itself from pure capitalism around the world. So, we've got to be careful about this. I can give a quick shout out here to our partners who sponsor this podcast, Achilles, leading supply chain company that looks at these sorts of things, looks at global supply chains, the movements of goods and services around the world and managing these global complexities and making sure that their clients understand how things are changing. And if that sounds like something that would be worth investing in or investigating, make sure you contact Achilles. Their contact details are in the show notes. But here's a final thought from me in this monologue, which I hope has helped you. And this is the thought that Dean and I wanted to get to today. In the craziness that we are experiencing in the first month and a bit of 2026, if you look across the ocean to China, China's not crazy at the moment. It's not craziness in Beijing or Guangzhou or any of the other big cities in China, because China was ready for this. China was ready for the Kairos moment. China knew that at some stage, the capitalistic expansion of America, the insulation of EU and Europe, the ripple effects of Brexit, the ripple effects of the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, kind of unraveling to Mexico and Canada, the potential of South America and Africa to be disconnected from the USA and from EU, the growing influence of the BRICS, all of these things, all of these gray elephants, none of which should be a surprise, but all of which are now bundling together to create this perfect storm of change. China's just looked at all of those and said, what would we need to do to have the most successful moment, the Kairos opportunity, to do the things we want to do for our 2035 and our 2049 plan? What would we need to be ready to do? And there are a number of things. I could give you a list of 20. I'll give you a list of 3 or 4. We've got to be prepared to disconnect from the US dollar as the base currency that we use, and they're dramatically doing that. We've got to be prepared to sell some of the debt that we are holding, American bonds. They are doing that. We have got to be prepared to have relationships with our BRICS partners and extend further relationships to a lot of other partners. As soon as America might do something, the USA might do something that would cause other countries to be a little bit nervous, say Canada, China needs to be ready with trade negotiations to be able to conclude trade deals very, very quickly. They've done it with Canada, they've done it with the EU, they've done it with Brazil, they've done it with South Africa, they've done it with India. Like in the last 6 months, for a government to move that quickly for international trade negotiations means they were ready for it. They haven't just made this stuff up in the last 6 months. They've been ready for a long time. You've got to be prepared to open your borders up a little bit. China has been doing that. And you've got to be prepared if one of your trading partners, like the USA, starts to play some games with you around tariffs and things like that. You've got to know what are your non-negotiables. How will you do it respectfully? I think China's done it very, very well to be able to manage Donald Trump and to come out the other side maybe more unscathed than any other country. This is not about choosing right or wrong. Notice China hasn't made any loud noises about right or wrong or who's good or who's bad. It simply said, are we ready to take advantage of the opportunities that are coming our way and to put ourselves in the best possible position to grab the Kairos moment and come out the other side? And yeah, if you're keeping score, I'm going to give them about a 10 out of 10. I don't know what China could have done to do any better than they've done in the last 6 months. It's honestly a case study in how to deal with disruption, chaos, the VUCA, Banny world, whatever language you'd like to use. So maybe, just maybe, it's worth you stepping back a little bit, digging a little bit into the China 5-year plans. Go and have a look at the latest, the 15th 5-year plan, which is the current set of realities. The 2 sessions meeting will be coming up in a few weeks' time. Look for announcements about that and just keep an eye on it. You keep an eye on Washington, you keep an eye on Toronto, you keep an eye on London, you keep an eye on Brussels, you keep an eye on Riyadh even these days in Dubai. So just keep an eye on the Chinese government, on Beijing. But then also go and download the 2035 and 2049 plans. If our webmaster is kind to you, we'll find the direct links and put it in the show notes for you, make it easy for you. But honestly, the Chinese government makes it easy for you to find these things. And just look at this with the perspective of what could we learn from an organization. Let's think of China as an organization that really does do long-term planning and has Kairos thinking in their DNA. I think you will find that there's a lot to learn and a little bit to admire and quite a lot to copy. Copyright, as it happens. Thank you. And Dean, as you listen to this, I hope you are pleased with what I did with turning a dialogue into a monologue. After the break, I'm really pleased to introduce Dr. Sarah Babb to you. This was an interview that we did a few weeks ago. It'll be my voice again, unfortunately, if you're not tired of it yet. But I had a wonderful interview with Sarah. Dr. Babb is a neurodivergent expert. She focuses on leadership coaching, but specifically working with teams around neurodivergence and what it means in the corporate and organizational space, why it's so important, and what we can learn from people who think just a little bit differently. She is an entrepreneur, worked in a number of companies, now is a consultant and also adjunct faculty at the Gordon Institute of Business Science, one of South Africa's leading business schools, where she is one of the professors on programs looking at neurodiversity. I had a wonderful conversation with her, and I'm sure you will enjoy it too. We'll be back shortly.
Elephants in the Boardroom is proudly brought to you by our partners at Achilles. As a leader in sustainable global risk management for businesses and their supply chains, Achilles helps the world's largest companies build and maintain ethical, sustainable, and transparent business practices. While we explore the elephants in the boardroom, Achilles is at the forefront guiding businesses through the risks and the opportunities these grey elephants present. If you're interested in how change impacts your supply chain or ESG strategy, it's worth connecting with Achilles. Visit achilles.com to learn more.
Sarah, Dr. Sarah Babb, it's lovely to have you joining us on the podcast. Thank you so much. I've been really looking forward to this conversation. I'm a father of neurodiverse children. I'm a friend of neurodiverse people. I'm pretty sure I'm neurodiverse myself, although not actually officially diagnosed. And it really, really just is a huge topic of conversation and absolutely a force for change in the world. So, Sarah, why don't you just sort of give us an overview of the research you've done, who you are, what you do, and why you were interested in neurodiversity?
Super. Thanks, Graeme. And yes, I've found that this has been a gradual process of coming to this point because I've worked over the years also with futures thinking and complexity and culture change. And as we see companies transforming internally, more and more have they looked at how do we see our talent, how do we understand our interchange with digital transformation and draw on our neurodiversity, our difference in our thinking more. And that's drawn me to understand more that we are so divergent in our neurological wiring and that there is actually an unseen diversity of plus 15 to 20% of our population that are unseen and in our customer base and our employee base that we're not actually drawing in. Alongside that, I myself was on a journey of discovery of a late diagnosis of ADHD and was also curious about then the interchange with women and development as we grow older, and what that means in terms of senior leaders of women leaving organizations and our talent pool that we're not tapping into. And the strengths that these different neurodivergent profiles bring has really shown that there's been great opportunity for businesses to leverage off this if we understand it better. So my research has taken me more into organizations and neurodivergence, both from the boardroom through to the customer base, women and neurodivergence, because now we're understanding women's health and the impact of hormonal fluctuations, and then entrepreneurs and neurodivergence, because there is such a high prevalence of the strengths of the ADHD profile and entrepreneurship, all coming together in this mission to say, how do we actually build neuroinclusion so that we're tapping into the best of all of our neurodiversity?
Sure. What an amazing sort of confluence of streams that you've brought together in your research. Just in case the last person on the planet who's never heard of neurodiversity is listening to this podcast, can you give us a definition? What do we mean when we say that somebody is neurodiverse?
Yes, and I think there has been a recent shift in how we understand a neuroaffirming definition of neurodivergence. So if we look at Stanford, I like Dr. Fung's definition, where it just says it's a normal variation of brain functioning. And within that spectrum of brain functioning, we have neurodivergence, which is a different way of brain wiring, but also that means a difference in how we process information, sensory and environmental information that comes to us. So within that spectrum of brain functioning, within neurodivergence, there are people that have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. There are people that have on the autism spectrum is Tourette's, dyslexia, dyspraxia, and many others. So within that, it really is to be understood as a normal variation. It's not that we can actually have a dualism of neurotypical and neurodivergent, because every brain, and neuroscience is teaching us this more and more every day, how our brain function is like a fingerprint. We are all wired differently.
I actually love that, Sarah. We learned early on. So I have 3 daughters, just to put the personal touch onto this. My youngest is on the autism spectrum, but at 20 years old, can't really read or write, has a limited vocabulary, and so on. My oldest daughter is very high functioning as a person. In her early varsity days, had a bipolar episode, and turns out to be fully bipolar, and now managing it. I mean, she's doing a master's in English literature now, and functioning well. And we just, as a family, ever since the autism diagnosis of my youngest daughter, about 14, 15 years ago, we just, the word normal disappeared from the vocabulary. And we realized there is no such thing, right? The middle daughter is divergent in other ways. And I love the way of framing that every brain fits somewhere in the normal distribution. And it's probably a 7-dimension distribution if we clear about it, and you fit somewhere in there. And nowhere in there is actually the word normal. So it's not as if we're saying there's a normal set of brains, and then there's a whole set of brains that are not normal. There's a spectrum in multiple directions of different ways in which brains function and process, right? And some of those are useful for some things, and some of them are useful for others, and some can do things quite easily and find other things hard. And it's that change of thinking that I think is important for people to understand, right?
Exactly. And I think 2 parts of that. The one is the complexity or the intersectionality of the diagnosis is also becoming clearer. And when there's a misdiagnosis, that can actually be really challenging for the individual, for the family. It elongates the process of understanding, but also finding ways that you can accommodate for the less strong capabilities, if you want to put it like that. So you mentioned bipolar, but there's sometimes that is misdiagnosed in terms of the autism spectrum or other neurological conditions that might be, these are conditions like epilepsy or Parkinson's that are actually deficit in terms of neurological wiring is different from the neurodivergent brain. So it does get complex. Even some of the definitions like pathological demand avoidance or rejection sensitivity, So it is complex, exactly. But I think there's also debate around how do we support diagnosis and disclosure for the individual to understand, for the families, organizations to really be able to work with this diversity that we say we so desperately want. So in the boardroom and in our talent and culture strategies, we say we want diversity of thinking. But that means really, do we really want that? And are we prepared to discuss it? Are we prepared to understand it? Are we prepared to support it so that we can really allow every person to thrive in the context of our workplace? And I think the second point was around the spiky profile, as you mentioned. So
Yes.
the strengths of the profiles can fit well in terms of the natural tendencies of, for example, the autistic brain for attention to detail, pattern recognition, fits some disciplines really well. Like I spoke on Friday to 100 actuaries in an insurance company where there's a higher prevalence because it's a natural fit, for example, in that discipline.
Absolutely, and especially on the Asperger's side of that. I know that's not necessarily the right label anymore, but yeah, you would imagine in a room full of actuaries, you're going to have quite a lot of people on the autism spectrum somewhere. I similarly got very excited at some stage about a program Microsoft had, where they were bringing in lower functioning people on the spectrum to help them to develop the haptic feedback of their tablet computers. Because they said if a sort of non-verbal person with a lower vocabulary was able to use a tablet, and my autistic daughter can, bizarrely, I would say she can't read or write, but she can use a tablet and find her way around the internet. So there's some things going on that doesn't fit our normal categories. And Microsoft employ some of those in order to help them to make sure that they can design an interface that works for everybody. Because if it worked for Rebecca, it can work for everybody. But it isn't just those niche applications, right? This was why I was interested in speaking to you. Because we say we want innovation, we need diversity, resilience comes from different people seeing the world in different ways. I think most people, as you say, would say that they want that and would say that they're open to that. But what has been your insight into what's actually happening, or maybe, and this is the point of this podcast series, is maybe what should companies be looking at in the future in terms of maybe seeing this as what we term our elephants in the boardroom, something that's sitting there staring you in the face, but maybe you're not doing anything with it. What advice would you give an executive, a leader in a company around this issue?
So the advice I would give is to really look at an integrated approach to your talent and your unseen diversities, the talent that we bring in terms of our discretionary thinking, our discretionary effort, our innovation, creativity, which is all inside us. And that means looking at your overall policies and procedures and your overall structuring of your teams to build on strengths-based and skills-based systems. So when you're bringing people in, you're bringing them in on the strengths-based attached to that task or the outcomes of a project. You're not necessarily bringing in based on old style qualifications, or even tenure might not be exactly what is needed in that particular agile, adaptive team approach. So there's systemic views you can take around your human capital strategy, around how you understand talent in your business, and obviously how your climate is around inclusion, belonging, and diversity, even though those terms have lost favor in some countries. But really, do you have a safe environment where people are raising ideas, challenging, critical thinking, engaging in flexible behaviors to bring around fast change? And this we all understand that we need for future fit organizations. So there's a really good match in terms of understanding neurodiversity and building systemically organizations that can be adaptive. What I'm seeing at the moment is further down the spectrum of approaches. I'm seeing companies that take a project approach. So SAP has Autism at Work program, but that then is almost, Ernst & Young has developed 23 centers of excellence for neurodiverse centers of excellence, where they bring in intentionally neurodivergent brains to tackle issues, and they're claiming huge value. $1 billion value creation is what they're claiming that they're able to do through that. Your example of Microsoft bringing in potential customers, etc. That's a project approach. It doesn't necessarily build an organization. I think even more what we're seeing is on further down the spectrum is an individualized approach to neurodivergence, where it's somebody whispers in the ear of a human capital person, and then they are treated very confidentially and given a reasonable accommodation because that environment is still full of stigma and bias, potentially fear of career limiting disclosure, which people have different experiences on. So my advice would be, can we leapfrog those phases to really be looking broadly at what are we bringing in terms of our talent overall? What's interesting is the trend in Europe, for example, with the disability inclusion legislation is really saying that all organizations need to show that they are inclusive of all disabilities in their products and services, as well as their communications, like their websites even. If we look at the implications of that for our companies, like you mentioned, Microsoft, have we really looked at our products and services in the untapped market of neurodivergent individuals too? So organizations like Valuable 500 that have been set up with the World Economic Forum have, I think to date, 527 global organizations that have signed up to build disability inclusion in their businesses. And Africa has just launched that version of it. And this is where organizations are also being awarded prizes for their inclusion, recognized globally. And they're claiming that there's a $1 trillion gap in terms of market opportunity by targeting customers that are neurodiverse. So this is definitely a growing trend, and I think it's something to look at, as you said up front, in terms of the markets that we're working with and also our internal employees. There's a surge in diagnosis of younger children because the diagnosis tools becoming less gender biased. It's more understood amongst more, let me say, serviced schools. There's still a gap in terms of the higher education systems. But what's happening then is the parents, because it's largely genetic, there are other causes, but parents are saying, I recognize these traits in myself, and are being diagnosed then at a later stage or an older age or midlife age. And so the implication of that is that actually there's I'm told, but yet to verify in this country, around 30% of your employees or potential market that you could be working with.
I'm really glad you've mentioned the market opportunity as well. Not just because everything has to be about profit and products and services, but it does tend to focus the mind, right? That you're not doing this for some, and I hate the word, but let's use it because people use it here, for some woke reason or because you want to be kind to a few underprivileged people. I mean, that's, no, not at all. We're doing this because it's good for business. Yes, it's good for the people as well, but it's also good in society. There are products and services that are needed that are not there. I know from an autism perspective that it sort of is about 1 in 70, 1 in 80 people is autistic, but that's just one of these. And I was going to ask you, and you've given the answer already. I would absolutely believe that it's 1/3 of all people fit, if you imagine a bell curve, fit outside sort of the middle percentiles, right? So again,
yes.
It's a spectrum. But you could easily say that there would be 1/3 of people are not well serviced in a variety of different ways. Your website, your app, your marketing communications doesn't resonate with them. The packaging on your shelves, the way you've set your store up doesn't work well for them. Literally even the music and how loud it is in the background, or whether it's cool or warm light, you know. Honestly, once you go down this path, you might realize in your industry you could get a significant competitive advantage by just making a few tweaks. It probably is not a massive overhaul required.
Exactly. And just by way of example, the tourism industry in Europe and the UK has really latched onto this. So how interesting. So they have times that they advertise that they are wanting neurodivergent people to feel welcome. So it is lower lighting, no music in the background, less disruption, maybe a calmer tone, so there isn't the sensory overwhelm, but they're doing it in off-peak times. So Isn't that clever? So here's a win-win. So with the
Yes.
very little tweaking, you're attracting a market or an untapped market to come to you that wouldn't ordinarily want to be confounded by crowds and overlighting or etc. And you're attracting at a time that is off peak. So I think it's just marvelous opportunities in that way. So if we could kind of extract that to other industries, there are, as you say, all kinds of possibilities that open up. One attraction, one of the, is it Gaudi sites in Spain, also openly advertises that they recruit only personnel that serve customers that are neurodivergent. So, because there's a particular friendliness and openness amongst this group that they have found to be excellent customer service. It's repetitive, it's work, it's not necessarily requiring a high functioning level, to your point. And they're finding that a younger generation is being drawn to that because Gen Zs are more open at self-identifying their own neurodivergence or their own preferences. It's actually building brand reputation to be saying we are inclusive to all. And we know that, I think, because of the LGBTQI plus conversations becoming much more around brand inclusiveness than just practically or, by word.
I know it's not the same thing, and I don't want to confuse neurodivergence and brain issues, so brain diseases. But it just reminds me, there's a restaurant in Japan that employs people with dementia as the waiters. And it is Japanese. There is something about Japanese culture that can be pretty crazy. But the idea is that you might not get what you ordered because the person who took your order literally doesn't quite. And you're laughing, I'm laughing. But that restaurant, you cannot get a booking at that restaurant because and it's a lot of young people go. They know what they're getting into, right? They know what they're signing up for, and they are doing it as part of a support. It is an experience. You're not there to laugh at people. You're there to support people, but you accept what it is, right? Now, that's a pretty extreme example. I'm not saying everybody must go to that example, but it does, I hope, give people who are listening to this the idea that the world, I think, is ready for some of this conversation. And the world is ready to say not everything has to fit into this little band called normal, where everything is A/B tested with focus groups and then only the things that normal people would do count. In fact, I think that's almost entirely the wrong way to go about it. You want to look for the human, the exceptional, the unexpected, the different. And then maybe the neurodiverse staff member and the neurodiverse team developing products for neurodiverse clients and customers, maybe that's something you should be putting more effort and energy into.
Agreed. And I also think that we're seeing the backlash of trying to fit into a normal mold with the increase in burnout and mental health challenges, depression, anxiety. Well. And I think with social media and other, what is norm? And I'm interested, I have a teenage daughter, so I learn from her every day. And there's a phrase at the moment going around, raw dogging. So raw dogging.
Yeah.
So raw dogging, when the teens are going no gadgets, no earphones, no phones, no computers, no laptops, and literally sitting on the floor in their room for 15 minutes. Isn't that extraordinary? So the trend is coming to almost disconnect. So it's almost saying I'm reclaiming that I'm not going to go falling into this trap. So I think there are other trends there that absolutely support. My colleague, who I'm very fond of, refers to herself as neurospicy. Says I've got a different way of viewing. Another colleague just talking about use of technology. She's an MD of a PPP, so it's a challenging environment. She's very strong. She's late diagnosed, also neurodivergent, but it's helped her understand why she's had certain traits. But one of the things that frustrates her is she says, nobody understands me because I'm just, I have so many ideas and I think so big and I have to really slow down. So she uses ChatGPT she'll type or say what she wants to say, and then she says, please translate this, and I'm sorry I'm using the term, but for neurotypical audiences. So ChatGPT reverse engineers to actually put it in a language for linear thinking. So yes, the ideation, the innovation, actually could help us build a more connected, well society. And for me, that would be a mission I'd really want to support. It's enabling the employability and the well-being of neurodivergent communities, building neuroinclusion, where it is normalized for us to talk about what is going on inside that is our wiring and not an exception to the rule.
And if anybody still needs to process that mission statement through a profit and loss lens, let's just remind them that a few moments ago you said this is probably, I know it's a rough guesswork number, but it's probably a $1 trillion industry, if it was an industry. And once you begin to think about it, the products and services and the customization and personalization, if you saw this as a market of 1/3 of the people of the planet need some kind of special thing, don't ignore this, right? Don't ignore this.
Exactly. And the special thing, as you say, might be around sensory. Imagine when I used to have a hybrid, I remember my aunt is blind, and the blind community used to complain about the hybrids for being too quiet on the road.
Yes, of course.
They couldn't
You can't
hear when
hear
the
them.
car
Yes.
came. But imagine that become an advantage inside the car, that it's quiet. We now this whole sensory experience that we already can customize voices and all the settings that we want to. Imagine a world where we are using technology in terms of immediate executive functioning and working memory support, that it's automated to do that. For people with dyslexia, that's the highest profile of neurodivergence, as you said, that your websites and that your menus, that your labels are immediately using means that can communicate more effectively. So lots of, as you say, easy tweaks, but just with a conscious attention that we can bring that forward.
Sarah, this has been exactly what I was hoping it would be, that it's just, hopefully people can hear that this definitely does deserve to be on our list of elephants in the boardroom, right? Things that are there should be obvious. There is not a single person listening to this podcast who doesn't know somebody, probably even in their close circle of family and friends who's neurodivergent, if not yourself. I mean, even the fact that you've listened this far into the podcast, you're probably not normal, whatever that means. But thank you for your time. If I can give the last word to you, Sarah, if we've got people now, business decision makers, listening to you, and Dr. Sarah Babb wants to put something in their ear that hopefully makes a difference, what would you say?
The unseen diversities, I would say, build our future fit skills for our organizations to be sustainable and adaptable, that we're really drawing on the best of our unseen way of thinking. So this, for me, is a worthy cause for all of us to support for ourselves and our communities.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you.